Indeed, he says. We can make a criminal referral. He says, sure, to the Justice Department. He goes, Justice Department, they're behind this too. Did you have any meetings with anyone associated with the J6 committee? There it is. He goes, I believe I did. You got me. Now, finally. Dude's a liar. That was a one-car accident involving her county vehicle. Whoa, that's interesting. Fani got in a car accident. The deposition of Nathan Wade that occurred October 15th, Tuesday in Washington, D.C. in the Rayburn House office building, starting at 10 a.m., 1 minute early, right on time. Good morning. This is the deposition of Nathan Wade, former special prosecutor at the Fulton County DA's office. Chairman Jordan, Jim, has requested this deposition as part of the committee's oversight of politically motivated prosecutions by state and local Fanis, just like Fani did, and they used federal funds to do it, saying on September 20th, the chairman, Jim, authorized the first deposition subpoena, and we sent around that email to your counsel and then to you on Saturday. Now, may have sent that to you after your counsel instructed us that he was not authorized to accept service. So he sent it to your lawyer, then your lawyer sent it to us and said, we don't want it. Then there was a back and forth with the Marshal's service. Nathan's sitting there like, meh. And so we'll probably have questions about that, trying to serve you. But ultimately, you were served on September 26th, if you remember that, which in fact was the morning of the subpoena. So you did not appear for the first deposition subpoena. He's laying a record here. Now on October 2nd then, Nathan, the committee issued a new subpoena for you to appear today, which is October 15th. And so we're going to mark that as Exhibit 1. Exhibit's marked for identification. Now, I probably should have said this at the top. My name is Deposition Leader here, and I am a staffer with Jim Jordan's staff, the House Judiciary Committee. Now, I'll have the other staffers in here introduce themselves, starting with my colleague, so-and-so. I'm here. And I'm here with Nadler. Oh, Jerry Nadler, the waddler, the guy with the diaper, walking around, waddling around. Someone needs to change him. It's been this way for 35 years. He's been in Congress. Intern with the Democratic staff. We've got Chairman Jordan's staff. Jordan. And just for the record, Mr. Wade, would you please state your name for the record? Nathan Wade says. Nathan Wade. And you're joined here with two lawyers. I'll have them introduce themselves. Mr. Evans, he says, counsel for Wade. Roy Barnes here, counsel for Nathan Wade. Depot guy, leader says. Now, I'll now go over the ground rules and guidelines that we're going to follow during today's deposition. Now, we're ordinarily going to take a short break. And Nathan, we'd just like to let you know, we'd like to make your experience here as comfortable as possible under these circumstances. He's like, well, that sounds good. Thank you. Now, as you can see, there's an official House reporter taking down everything we say. So please give verbal responses. Do you understand, Nathan? I do. And please speak clearly. Now, by law, you are required to answer questions from Congress truthfully. Nathan, do you understand that? I do. Now, this applies to questions propounded by congressional staffers in a setting like that. Do you understand that? I do. Now, you cannot provide false testimony. Do you understand that? I do. And you can't lie. Do you understand that? Yes, I do. And is there any reason, Nathan, why you're unable to provide us with truthful answers here today? No reason. All right. Well, guess what? The federal rules of all the different areas of law don't apply today because this is a House deposition. And so a witness's attorney may not instruct you to refuse to answer a question unless it's a constitutional privilege for some reason. Now, before we begin, we'll afford the lawyers an opportunity to offer any preliminary remarks. Defense attorney for Nathan, Mr. Barnes, and Mr. Evans both jump in. They're like, wait a minute. Before Nathan makes any preliminary remarks here, the common law privileges do apply no matter what the rules say. Your House rules can say this, but my rules say this, and you cannot force a witness to violate the rules of professional responsibility. Lawyer number 2 is like, yeah, and there's a Supreme Court case on that. And you're aware, Mazur's case. John Roberts talked about this, and so we'll assert this, all covered by privilege. And if you do, and Mr. Barnes says, and you can do it, and that's the reason they have the judges. But a ruling, and then Mr. Evans jumps in. He says, and by the way, I've also read Rule 11 times. And so it goes back to the depot guy. He's like, all right. Okay, well, I mean, we've never dealt with an objection on that ground before, says the depot guy leading this. Okay, so it's exactly how I made it sound is probably exactly how it sounded. Okay, it's a tag team by the two of them. There's like this dude who's like Jim Jordan staffer's like, the hell did you just say to me? What? And so I don't know. We've never dealt with an objection on this before. Well, you're dealing with Fani land. It's the Bizarro world over there. But just so we're all clear, if you're not going to answer questions, there's nothing we can do to make a witness. And the lawyer says, yeah, no, I understand. But I don't want to mislead by, after making your statement, not telling you what our position is. He says, okay, well, don't answer it. If you don't want to answer it, then don't answer it. Okay. And so the way the process would work is we'd confer with the chairman, Jordan, I guess, get a ruling, advise you of the ruling, give you an opportunity to answer if you do challenge this. And then from there, you know, the committee would proceed to contempt, like answer it or don't, but we'll take it up to Jim and then we'll hold you in contempt if we need to. And the lawyer says, well, sure. Well, then we'd be entitled to a jury trial in DC. And so he says, well, no, not a jury trial in DC. It's a contempt hearing in the House is what he says. The lawyer says, well, you can't enforce anything. What are you going to do about it? He says, do you have a jail? Wow. Nathan Wade's lawyer. What are you going to do? Congress? You can't enforce anything. You have a jail? No, we're not going to put anyone in jail over this. I mean, the House does have inherent contempt powers. Yeah, well, the only power you have is by criminal contempt, and you're entitled to a jury on criminal contempt, but we do not need we do, under the rules, have a provision, you know, with a contempt citation. We can go to court on civil, we can go the civil route, or the House can proceed via criminal contempt citation, whichever way you want to go. Yeah, sure, but both of those are going to be overseen by a federal judge, and we're here in DC, and they know that DC is their jurisdiction. Totally rigged, so who cares? He says, by a federal judge. House says, yeah, indeed. And the lawyer says, yeah, and if we're in a federal judge, we're going to be bound by the federal rules of evidence too. Indeed, he says. We can make a criminal referral. He says, sure, to the Justice Department. He goes, Justice Department, they're behind this too. Or in fact, we could just end up deciding to do nothing, which is more likely what's going to happen, of course, because of Congress. Barnes, the lawyer, says, well, you and I are not going to settle it, okay? But I just want to make sure that I was candid with you and tell you what our position is. He says, okay, fair enough. And in the spirit of that, other lawyer says, we've got largely categories of questions, biographical questions you could ask him, like talk about his, like how amazing he is. He can talk about that. But there's other categories of like conversations that he had with House committees that we're not going to answer. And he says, okay, well, and so I hope we can work through some of those, because to the extent that there were communications with other House committees, if you're not going to provide the content of those communications with other House committees, we would hope that you would provide the date and the individuals involved, because that certainly wouldn't be protected by the privilege. You can tell us that the conversation happened, but not what's in it. The lawyer says, well, no. I don't want to provide that. I mean, there are public records of some dates, but I'm not going to jeopardize the privilege. So I know you guys have invoices and stuff, but we're not going to get into those things. Now, right. So, but just so we understand, I mean, if we're talking about a communication, this is Congress, that's privileged, the fact that the communication occurred is not privileged. The fact that person A spoke to person B, at the level of a privilege log, we certainly would believe we're entitled to all that information. Lawyer says, all right, yeah. Okay, great. So we're good. All right. Any other opening remarks? I know there were some letters exchanged. Anything here? Do you have an interest in making those letters part of the record? Nathan's lawyer says, no, they're going to be made part of the record. Yeah, we are. We've marked them. Can I? Someone says, of course. Yeah. This person says, it will only take me 2 seconds. It's always good to be reminded that we don't have a jail in the House. So I just wanted to make a couple notes for the record. Now, first of all, thank the witness for joining us. Especially, I understand that you have a hurt ankle, Nathan Wade, probably from playing pickleball on another cruise. So thank you for traveling up here with an injury, among other things. Now, the buzzer went off, and I think everyone kind of perked up. That's just the House bell, so don't worry about that. There's proceedings on the House floors. I think they're probably done for the day. And then I wanted to make a couple notes. Now, we continue to have concerns about the videotaping of these proceedings, primarily because there's not been copies given to Democratic staff or members. I understand we are able to go view them in the majority's office suite, but that's not the same, especially with members not here because of, well, we're in recess. And when we are provided copies of these, okay, there's not really enough time. Some Republican responds, that's not true. I mean, you get a week. If we're going to release any video, we give it to you 1 week before we put it out. Somebody says, well, we've had a number of instances where we got them the day before. That's inaccurate. Someone else, that's inaccurate. No, we can go back and check the record. I still would argue that a week is, hey, we've been careful with the video. I mean, the video agreement is, okay, I appreciate that you want to talk over me, okay, but can I please finish my statements? I'm not trying to talk over you. I'm just trying to, but you literally are talking over me. So if I can finish my statement, then I'll give you the time back. Sound good? So we continue to have concerns with the video, as I was saying. We also continue to have concerns with the transcripts. I think there's been something like 135 depositions and transcribed interviews to date. The vast majority have not been released, including depositions and transcribed interviews back to 23. So that's over a year ago. Now, for the transcripts that have been released, a number of them have not been included, including the Oversight Committee, corrected errata, and so other things. And now we're fighting over transcripts and evidence. I think there's something like 40 transcribed interviews, so now it's just Congress people bickering. Nathan and his lawyers are like, this is just great. Just let them bicker it out as long as this can go. All right, anything else on the documents and the transcripts? We get the transcripts quickly, okay? We'll get them over to you enough. So finally, they're back and forth. All right, now that's what we've done in other interviews. The deposition transcripts are ready to go almost immediately. Okay, says the lawyer. Nathan Wade chimes in. So question, just a point of clarification. Yeah, Nathan, of course, what's up? He says, prior to the release of the transcript, my counsel will have the opportunity to review it before it's released. Of course. Nathan Wade says, now tell me what released means. What do you mean when release it, Nathan? He's very confused. Like, where does it go? Well, he says, normally we just put it on our website. All right, now if there's anything in the transcript you don't want, you can tell us. You can seek a redaction. We consider it. If it's personal information, we honor it. And this other guy chimes in, well, maybe you won't release it to Fox News this time. He says, well, I don't know how that happens if it goes to Fox News. He says, well, it did happen. You released it to Fox. He says, well, I don't know which one you're talking about. It was one of the impeachment transcripts. All right, well, I don't recall, okay? It was one of the U.S. attorneys who were interviewed by them. All right, well, all right, pipe down. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. All right, finally. All right, do you have any more questions? No? All right, shut up. All right, do you have an opening statement you'd like to offer, Nathan? He says, I do. Nathan Wade testifies to Congress. He says the following. Good morning. My name is Nathan Wade. I'm a licensed attorney in good standing in Georgia, which is incredible. Absolutely incredible. I am here voluntarily, after accepting subpoena from the House of Representatives. I'm here of my own volition, having paid for my own flight tickets and hotel room in an effort to respond to any inquiries, probably funneled through those taxpayer dollars into his bank account for legal work that was not earned. He says, please note all arrangements were made per agreement for my voluntary testimony to take place back in July, but you guys had to reschedule me. Now, you're aware I served as special assistant district attorney in the case of Fani versus Trump. Prior to this, I served as a prosecutor several times during my career. I began my private practice in 2000. I was a criminal defense attorney, tried many felony cases. Many cases garnered media attention. Also was a civil attorney, and I gave no attention to partisan politics. I've previously represented a Republican sheriff. I've also served as legal counsel for NAACP. Now, in 2010, I began serving as a judge in several cities in Georgia. I was invited to training. I received dozens of accolades at that training and apparently an introduction to Fani. But he got a bunch of accolades. Now, my team and I investigated the issues of election interference. He says, this case was not politically motivated. Rather, it was an independent investigation based upon facts and evidence. I had no mandate other than to seek honesty and the truth. I was never directed or ordered to do anything. I took my job seriously. No one at the White House or White House lawyer's office or the DOJ or Liz Cheney's committee or anyone forced me to bring an indictment against Trump. So what we did is impaneled the grand jury and presented the evidence. Following this recommendation, charges were brought. In trial court, after they tried to disqualify me, I testified and was cross-examined for hours by defense lawyers. And the motion to disqualify was denied, kind of. You got booted. You were disqualified. Fani was allowed to hang around. Now, in its distasteful dicta, and dicta, this is a Fani case, so I want to make sure we're clear about this. Dicta means stuff that is not essential to the holding. It's a legal term of art that means the holding said one thing and a judge talked about something else, but it's irrelevant to the ultimate decision. All right, that's what dicta means. I wouldn't say it like Nathan Wade dicta, talking about Fani Willis or something like that, But he says, it was distasteful, kind of like a noxious odor, The court opined that either I resign or Fani resign from the prosecution of the election interference case. I don't think it was dicta. Consequently, I voluntarily submitted my resignation immediately. Since that date, I've had minimum contact with the office of Fulton County, but there's still a lot of dicta going on at Fani's household. How do we speculate about that? Well, because he showed up when Fani's daughter got arrested on the side of the road. He had just finished having some dicta with Fani that night. Now, on May 9th, I received a letter from this committee on the judiciary requesting that I produce 6 categories of documents, and so I voluntarily complied with that. I had nothing responsive to the documents because he left the office. I don't have it. I left it all there. The committee's stated purpose in requesting those documents was to consider legislative changes. You also said you're going to increase statutory rights to go after bad prosecutors. So Wade says, look, I'm here to cooperate. Contrary to any fabricated story that I somehow evaded service of process, I voluntarily reached out to the U.S. Marshals and suggested a place and time where we could meet. Through false inflammatory media reports that he learned that Congress was trying to serve me. As soon as I found out about it, I went and sought a meeting with them. Now, you are aware that I am bound by the Georgia Rules of Conduct and I must maintain attorney-client privileges, and now I've been served with this letter, which will serve as guardrails directing my responses, and I'll read this letter to you, provide it as an exhibit. Okay, so then he reads Fani's letter, and Fani says, shut your mouth, honey, or you're sleeping on the couch tonight. He says, this is a letter sent to me by my lover, Fani. He's Nathan. Remember, you work for me. It's your responsibility. Don't say anything. It's privileged. We're going to seek an agreement with the committee, and I don't believe you have any information that's new, and so I'm confident that you're going to zip your lips, buddy boy, or you're busted. They say, okay, thanks for reading that. We already got it. Just put it in the exhibit. Someone says, well, what was the date of that? What exhibit? Exhibit 2? You have a copy? Okay, yeah. And we also have a letter to the governor. Do you have a date to that, governor? Yeah, it urges the chairman. So the governor, Roy Barnes, sent a letter back over to Jim Jordan. And Jim Jordan was told to seek anger management by Roy Roy Barnes. And Barnes says, yeah, I hope he has. Hope he's gotten his anger management training. And so Jim Jordan is just getting abused here, man. I wonder if he has any power to do anything about this. I don't know. So Nathan Wade is sworn in. Do you solemnly declare and affirm under penalty of perjury, Nathan, that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Now, in my opinion, Nathan Wade lied on the stand multiple times when he was there with Fani Willis, as did she. The clock now reads 10:35. Now the majority staff will begin an hour of questions by this person. They just move on. Good morning, Mr. Wade. Guy doesn't even agree. I think I have to read that as that's intentional, or it's an errata. It's a mistake. No? So good morning, Mr. Wade. I want to start off by talking a bit about your professional background. How many years have you been a practicing lawyer? Nathan says since 1999. And you're still licensed to practice in Georgia. Is that correct? That's correct. Is that the only jurisdiction that you're currently barred in? It's a female asking questions. Yes, ma'am. And so it's been about 25 years. Can you provide an overview of the previous positions you've held? He says, well, yeah, let me refer back to my statement here. It's great. Thank you again. Another bio. Private 2000, civil attorney, municipal judge. Okay. So you said in 2000 you started your private practice. Would that be the law offices of Nathan J. Wade? Yes, ma'am. And do you still practice under that moniker, under that name? I do. So you said your practice is focused on criminal offenses, but you've also worked on the civil side. Is that correct? It's not focused on criminal defense, but I've done them both. Yes, ma'am. If you had to characterize a primary focus for your years of practice, what would that be? Today, more civil. More civil. Was it in the past more criminal? In the past, it has been, yes. And are you currently just practicing under the law offices of Nathan J. Wade? Yes, ma'am. Are you employed by any other private law firms? No, ma'am. Defense attorney says, I know where this is going. I think he's going to need clarification on what that means. Someone else jumps in. Do you provide services to any other private law firms? Am I co-counsel at times with cases with other law firms? Nathan says, absolutely. Are you currently under a contract with any other private law firms? No, ma'am. Are you under any sort of joint partnership with any other law firms? No, ma'am. Mr. Evans says, we're talking about right now. I think it's a bad transcript. Again, I get so sick of this garbage. We're talking about what right now? It's just a bad transcript. Are you contracted to provide any services to any government entities? Currently, no, ma'am. When was the last time that you were contacted with a government entity to provide services? When I was contacted by my lover, Fani. And prior to your appointment as a special prosecutor for Fulton, had you been contracted with any other government entity to provide services? Yes, ma'am. Which ones were those? Well, I told you, Cobb County Sheriff, yeah. And City of Marietta, Municipal Judge, City of Roswell, Oswell. Well, I want to talk to you about, in your opening statement, about various correspondence that you've had, Nathan, that you and your counsel have had with the committee. And so we first requested your transcribed interview May 9th via letter. Did you get that letter of this year? Repeat the question, ma'am. So the committee said, we sent you a letter on May 9th. Did you receive that letter? Defense attorney, is that marked as one of the exhibits? It's not marked as one of the exhibits, says somebody. It's a subpoena and so. Well, I can read from the letter. Here's what it says. I'm not asking if you remember receiving the letter. I'm just asking if you remember it, not if you remember what's in it. Did you remember receiving it? Nathan says, well, I don't recall receiving. I do recall receiving a series of letters, but I don't recall the dates nor the contents of those letters. And when did you first seek to schedule your transcribed interview, if you can remember? I don't recall. That was a communication between my attorney and whomever he was communicating with. And so originally your transcribed interview was scheduled for late June. As you said in your opening statement, the committee needed to reschedule, right? Lawyer jumps in. Which letter are we talking about? He says September. Okay. The first sentence of the letter said, come here. Do you remember being informed by your lawyer that you would be at a transcribed interview on September 18th? Do you remember this? Nathan says vaguely. Had you made any travel arrangements to come here for the September meeting? Yes. And you ultimately did not appear, right, in September 18th. Is that right? Well, I want to make certain, says Nathan, that I'm answering as it relates to the proper letter. You know, there were so many letters back and forth that I don't want to mislead you. So let me be clear, says Nathan. The preparation to come for the July timeframe, that was agreed upon. So I did prepare to do that. And I believe that was the question you just asked me, right? Well, I asked you about your September 18th transcribed interview and the reschedule. Did you make any travel arrangements for that interview? For the 18th? Yes, the 18th. No. And you ultimately did not come on the 18th. Is that correct? Is that the subpoena that I was given on that date? No, sir. Okay, so he's playing dumb now. If you look at the September 21st letter, which is part of exhibit number 1, Nathan's flipping around through the papers. Well, I don't have a September. He says this one. He says, well, that says October 2nd. He says, okay, so here, it's the September 21st letter. I'm looking at the second paragraph, Nathan. It's right here. It says, you've ignored us for 2 months. Then we informed you. So in reading that, I'm asking you, Nathan, I read this back to you. Did you appear for your September 18th interview? Based on what I just read. He says, well, based upon what you just read, it sounds like I was not. That there were ongoing communications and negotiations and I wasn't required to appear. And so based upon your failure to appear, then we sent you a subpoena. Now, when did you first learn, Nathan, that the committee was issuing you a subpoena for your testimony. I had played in a community basketball league and hairline fractured my ankle. Okay, so it wasn't pickleball, it was basketball. Because of that, I was in and out of ortho surgery centers. Now, I was obviously prescription medicating because of the pain and the swelling in my ankle. So he's too drugged up. And to date, it's still swollen. So at times I may have to elevate it to keep my swelling down. He's like putting his foot up on the label right here. Look, check this out. But I took a few days to take care of my fractured ankle and to prepare for a mediation and an arbitration. Nathan says, when I was able to deal with the pain without the assistance of prescription pain medication, and I came to, he was delirious. Oh man, I wish we were watching this testimony. I turned on my cell phone and I prepared to go and exercise down in my exercise room. As soon as his medication, he's going to go exercise again. Now, when I did that, messages started to ring through all of a sudden. And one of the messages was from a U.S. Marshal identifying himself and leaving a phone number. Oh my gosh, I'm wanted. I'm a wanted man. I called that gentleman back. And at this point, it's like 4 a.m. because I rise at 4 a.m. to do my exercise regimen. Now he answered the phone. He's like, Jocko. And I said to him, I understand that apparently I am missing. He said, I've seen reports that no one can find Nathan Wade. I'm here. Who is looking for me? The marshal then said to me, sir, that is ridiculous. Okay. We know that you're not trying to hide or evade service. And I said, what service? And he said, I have something here to serve you from Congress. And I said that I tell you what, I can meet you now, or we can designate a time and a place. He said, no problem. He said, but that subpoena was for today. I said, well, he said, I don't think I'll need to serve that upon you, but let me get some clarification and I'll call you back. Hung up the phone. 8:30, 9 a.m. He called me back. He said, Mr. Wade, I'll need to go ahead and leave those papers with you. Where are you going to be? What time would you be there? I said, I'll tell you, I'll meet you at my office. I hadn't been to my office in quite some time because he was in hiding. Over a week, I hadn't been there. Now I'll be there and I'll meet you and you can give me what you need to give me, he said. Thank you. We hung up the phone. Maybe 45 minutes to an hour later, he walks through the door, shook my hand, handed me the documents, walked away. Okay, and was your attorney authorized to accept service of a subpoena on your behalf from the committee? He said, I hadn't spoken to my attorney at that point, but previous to the subpoena. Nope, we had no conversation about him accepting anything on my behalf, so he didn't. So you said that you had never spoken to your attorney about accepting service on your behalf, is that correct? We had no conversation about him accepting service of any kind on my behalf. So again, did he say do not accept service or rejecting service, right? You can be sneaky on it, I don't know. Now on September 21st, as Blank noted in his opening remarks, he emailed you a copy of the subpoena. Did you receive that email? Who emailed me? This guy. Oh, I don't know. I don't recall receiving an email, says Nathan. But if he says he sent it, I'm sure he did. He seems to be an honest man, says Nathan. Now, are you aware that on the same day prior to sending you that subpoena, Blank also attempted to send the subpoena to your attorney? Were you aware of that? No. So did you have any communications with your attorney on September 20th when the subpoena was authorized? I'm not looking for content of discussion, just yes or no, sir. Oh, he says, do I have contact with my attorney? Constantly, of course. I mean, now look, lawyer jumps in. That goes to conversations we've had, okay? I would tell him not to answer that question. Right now we're talking about talking to your attorney. He's like getting a little close for my comfort. And my questions are, did he talk through Fani? Okay, did the lawyers talk to Fani and then Nathan talked to Fani? So yes, he did not talk to his lawyers about service. He talked to Fani and then Fani talked to the lawyers about it, right? Now we're just looking for whether a conversation occurred, not the content, just a yes or no. He says, well, conversations that he has with me are privileged. Okay, so I'm going to tell him not to answer that. Yeah. So did you have a conversation with your attorney ever about the subpoena? Question. He says, that's content. He says, yeah, don't answer that. Okay. Did we ever have a conversation about the subpoena? He says, yeah, I'm going to instruct him not to answer that. You're asking him what we talked about. Did you have any conversations with your attorney? He says, same thing. I'm just looking for a yes or no. He says, no, same thing, same objection. On the 23rd, did you talk to him? No. Same objection. Don't answer it. Don't answer it. Did you talk to Fani Willis about a subpoena? Be a good question in here. Shove that in there. So on September 23rd, that was the first time that the marshals attempted to serve you in person. Were you aware that they attempted to serve you in person on September 23rd? Well, I think I just shared my experience on what happened. Okay, so your testimony is that you turned off your phone because you had fractured your ankle. Is that correct, sir? No, ma'am. My testimony was that I turned off my phone to prepare for an arbitration and mediation that was upcoming, along with nursing my ankle back to health. So I sort of, when I go into trial mode, says Nathan, when I'm preparing for trial, I shut the world off. But what about Fani? Does he have a secret phone with her? My job is to handle my client's business, and I don't want any outside interference. So I had no contact with anyone during the course of that preparation. So what date did you turn your phone off? Well, I turned it off. The exact date, I can't recall. I'd give it to you if I could. I can't recall the exact date. So did the phone, if we requested your phone records for September 20th to the 26th, will we find that your phone was off and you had no communications via your cell phone? So, well, I don't know what date it was shut off, but during the course of that period, you will find no communications because the phone was off. And so So what happened first? The phone being turned off or you hurting your ankle? So well, I hurt my ankle first. Okay. And so between that time, you said you turned your phone on then at 4 a.m., then on September 26th, and that's when you received the messages from the marshals. Is that correct? Or did I mix this up? He says, I don't recall. I do recall the marshal saying, this is a subpoena, and I turned my phone on and I called him right back. So on the second attempt to serve the subpoena in person on September, the marshal spoke to a work crew that was doing some landscaping work at your house. Are you aware of those conversations that occurred? You're referring to the second attempt, right? What's the first attempt? Well, the marshals made several attempts to serve Wade the subpoena. In person, they did, says the defense lawyer. In person, yeah, they did. That's correct. When was the first attempt? First was the 23rd, Monday. And the second attempt was when? The 24th. Lawyer says, okay. Okay, so on the 24th is the date they spoke with your landscaping. Are you aware they spoke to the landscapers? No, Nathan says. And I'm shocked that the marshals never mentioned to me that they had come to my home. I had no conversation with anyone doing any landscaping around my property at that time either. And on September 24th, Nathan, they also attempted to serve you in person at your law office. Are you aware of that? I am not. During the course of that conversation, the marshal did say to me that he stopped by my law office and the paralegal or receptionist told him I was not there. And the marshals represented to the committee that the paralegal told the marshals that you were out of town until October 2nd. Do you remember that? They said, no, he's gone. Is that an accurate statement? Were you out of town, Nathan, until October 2nd? He says, I don't know what they would have shared with them. I don't know. Well, and then you said at 4 a.m. to the 26th, and you reached back out to the marshals. Is that correct? I did. And you did that via phone call? I did. And then you accepted service on the 26th on that date. On the morning? Whatever that morning was, yes. And then on October 2nd, the committee issued another subpoena, and you accepted service of that one, right? Is that correct? So because at this point, I had had contact with the marshal via cell phone. That same gentleman called me. He said, Mr. Wade, I have another document for you, and how can I get it to you? I said, well, when do you want to get it to me? And he said, as soon as possible. I told him at that point, I'm on my way to court. He can meet me at the courthouse. He's like, here's where I'm going, and here's the time that I'll be there. And he said, okay, I'll show up there. I'll hand you the documents. And he did that. Okay, so now I want to pivot now, says the questioner, to talking about your appointment as special prosecutor for Fulton County Attorney's Office. So who contacted you first about the special prosecutor position? Nathan says, well, gosh, who contacted me to go prosecute Trump? Well, this is an interesting story or series of events, how this came about, says Nathan. And forgive me, Governor Barnes, I'm going to have to tell on you here. He says, that's fine. You won't be the first. Because remember, Roy Barnes was also considered for this position, allegedly. Nathan says, well, I was part of the search committee, if you will, for the then newly elected district attorney, Fani. Question comes from this person. Okay. Can you provide the dates for when you were part of the search committee? Oh God, I cannot. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, if it's helpful, Fani came into her office January 21. Is that helpful for a time frame? January 21. He says it is. Yeah, it's helpful. Okay. So January 1st, I was part of the search committee for that newly elected Fani. We were tasked with trying to identify someone who would be lead counsel on election interference investigation. Wow, that's incredible. So on January 1st, I was part of the search committee. So the question is, did this happen before she took office, right? She comes in, she hasn't even looked at any evidence yet, and she's already establishing a committee to prosecute Trump, almost like part of her campaign. The goal or the trick was to make certain that the individual selected or identified was one who had no axe to grind, the special counsel, who can be objective. There are about 3 to 5 candidates, a few of them which I cannot recall, but there are a multitude of individuals. One of them was Roy Barnes. He, I guess, artfully bowed out because safety, yeah. He would cite low financial compensation. He says, I'm busy and I get paid too much. Now I should have taken the hint when he said that, says Nathan, but I did not. I didn't understand what he understood apparently. I had no clue that I would need security for accepting that position. But at any rate, he was the one that turned that position down, says Nathan. Other people turned it down too. Eventually, I guess the committee turned their guns on me and started trying to convince me to accept the role, the committee that he's on. I said no. I said no more than once. But at some point, I relented and I accepted the case because it did pose some interesting legal issues, like dicta. I was unlike any concept or anything that I'd ever dealt with. Yeah, because it's never happened before. As a matter of fact, it turns out it's unlike anything that's ever happened in American history. So I was right in that regard. Yeah, because you guys breached 234 years of American historical precedent. Good job. Now, he says, I didn't give enough credence, though, to the underlying warnings that were issued to me by former Governor Barnes. And so the search committee, you said, began when Fani took office on January 1st. Is when you started searching? Yes. And was there outreach to you to be a part of this search committee before January 1st? Oh, absolutely. And when did that start? Sometime after the election, but before she took office. Okay, so between the election, and you're referring to the November 2020 election, is that right? Yes, ma'am. And so when you had conversations with individuals, you said on multiple occasions that you said no, and you turned the positions down. Were those conversations, who were those with? Well, they were with, well, mostly with Fani. Lawyer says, I'm going to start objecting soon because now we're talking about him working with her now, and she says you can't talk about that. So you said that you had conversations with Fani prior to your appointment as the special prosecutor, right? Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. So you talked about the role itself, right? Yes. Did you have any, I would say, did you have any interviews with Fani regarding the position? Nathan Wade nails it. Define interview. What does this mean? Says Nathan. Yeah. Oh yeah. We had multiple interviews repeatedly. She says, like a job interview, for crying out loud, where you sat down with Fani and she talked about your job qualifications, okay? The role of the special prosecutor, like why you would be the best fit for the position. This writes itself. I can't help what's in the transcript. Was there any sort of discussion like that? He's like giggling like a schoolgirl. He's like, you better believe I was the best fit for Fani. You better believe it. It was more of a conversation sort of making me aware of my background and accomplishments, if you will. So if that's an interview, then that's what it was. But it was more of her and her counsel at the time just kind of reminding me like, well, you've done this and you've done that and you've done this and you've done that. Could I just ask, are we talking about him serving as the special prosecutor or him serving on the search committee? And people are like, I don't know. Or what? Or serving in some other capacity? I'm talking about the appointment as the special prosecutor. Okay. And so how many conversations, if you had to quantify, do you believe you had with Fani before you were hired as her dicta? I have no clue, ma'am. Was it more than 5? Was it more than 10? I have no clue. It was a lot. More than 1? Oh, absolutely. Did you have any conversations with anyone else besides Fani regarding your role? And Governor Barnes, I'll say. I did. And I'm trying to recall if that was this person. And who is this person? Well, he's the individual that I had the conversation with prior to my being appointed, if you will, as special prosecutor. Did he work in Fani's office? Well, at the time she didn't. She hadn't taken office yet. Okay, so you spoke with this woman prior to Fani taking office. Is that right? Yes, I did. Okay, any other individuals besides this person, Governor Barnes or Fani, that you talked about the position with? Well, I'm sure there were. I just can't recall who else I talked to. Okay, well, I'm going to mark another exhibit. This is Judge McAfee's order, and we're going to use this as an exhibit. You want to review this order? He says, I'm good to go. I've seen it. Now, in your opening statement, Nathan, you referred to distasteful dicta, the legal term, not what happened with Fani. Is this what you were referring to, this order? He says, yeah, portions of it. Yes, ma'am. Well, I want to look specifically at page number 1. The sentence starts with among other. Do you see it? I'll read it into the record. It says, among other allegations of disqualifying conduct, the defendants contend that Fani, so that's Trump and the defendants, they say that Fani obtained a personal stake in the prosecution of this case by financially benefiting from her dicta with Nathan Wade, whom she personally hired to lead the state's prosecution team. Now, I'm just wondering if you could help us unpack what the judge said when he said personally hired. What does that mean? Would you describe that as DA Willis having conversations with you? Did she give you the job offer? Can you help us understand what personally hired means? Whom she personally hired is what McAfee said. Objection calls for speculation. All right. Well, did you receive a job offer from Willis? Nathan, if you're asking me to interpret what this judge was meaning when he made those statements, I can't. I mean, I couldn't do it for you. I don't know. So would you say the fact that his statement that she personally hired you is, he said that, would you say that's inaccurate? Lawyer jumps in. Well, you're asking what Nathan's understanding of a judge is, and he had no way to know what McAfee said by that. Well, I'm asking if he believes that statement that he was personally hired, if that was accurate. Well, you're asking him to his understanding. To your understanding, Nathan, is that accurate? He says, aside from what he wrote in this order, I can tell you that the only person who had the authority to appoint me as special prosecutor was Fani. That's who had the authority to make the appointment. Aside from whatever the process was, ultimately she had the authority. So when you received a job offer or a contract from Fulton County, were those discussions had with Fani? He says, wait, that's too broad, lawyer says. Are you asking about specific things or what? Let me tighten it up, she says. When you were retained by Fani's office, you would agree that you were retained by her office. Is that correct? I would agree with that. When you were retained by Fani, who did you have conversations with? Well, I had conversations upon being retained, and contracting with Fani's office with this person. And what was this person's role with Fani's office? I don't know what the exact title he has was. And what did you discuss with this person? Was it just the maneuvers of the contract? Were there specifics? Of what? Well, he said that he had conversations with blank regarding his retention. So I'm asking in what regards? Was it your conversation about the specifics of the contract? Was it about the rate you would be given per hour? Nathan says all of the above. Okay. And did you have any of those types of conversations with Fani, or were those just with this dude? Lawyer says, hang on, you got to be more precise. What's the actual question? Congress says, well, the actual question is, we have just discussed that he had conversations with blank about his retention as as prosecutor. Excuse me, he says. He described that he had had conversations about the rate. He had had conversations with blank about the contract itself. So I'm asking, did he discuss any of those? His rate or his contract with the DA Willis? Lawyer says, okay. Nathan says no. Someone else jumps in with questions. No. Okay, so you just had those conversations with blank. Well, that was his job. His job was to sit with me, hammer out the details of the contract, says Nathan, which were, this is our contract, this is our rate, sign it. So there you go. That's it. And in the judge's order, it states that you were personally hired to lead the state's prosecution team. Is that accurate to describe you as the lead for the prosecution team? Now that we've gotten through all that. Nathan says, yes, that's accurate. Finally, gosh. Did you have any discussions with Fani regarding leading the prosecution team? He says, yeah, that's what she hired me to do. Beyond just explaining that you would lead the team, were there any more details provided? Like how many employees you would supervise, if you'd lead a team? Do you have office space? Were there any of those types of conversations? Nathan says, well, there's a contract that's in the public sphere and that I'm just going to ask that the four corners of that document control, says Nathan. The contract speaks for itself. If you don't have it, I could ask us to give you a copy of it. I know that it was provided in discovery, the copy of the actual contract that was executed. So whatever the details are, it's in there, whatever the contract was. And prior to that contract being sent to you, you discussed it with this guy from Fulton. Now, I believe you said his last name was eliminated. Is that correct? So that's interesting, right? Now, that's the second time we've seen a word omitted. So it looks like they're omitting things instead of redacting things. Did you have any discussions with Willis of what the job would entail? What else is omitted? It's all in the contract, he says. Did you lead a team of prosecutors? I did. And how many did you? Who were on your team? Nathan says, so let me say this. Those men and women, many of which are not known to the public, there's some safety concerns there. And I don't think we should really be talking about, someone else jumps in. She didn't ask for names. Nathan looks over to him. Am I responding to you or him? Which one? Nathan's getting mad. Well, he's here. He'll just help out with the objections. I'm sorry. This is a deposition. I think under deposition rules, only one counsel is allowed to ask questions. I didn't ask a question. I just confirmed that she did not ask any names. Well, I think that's a violation of the rules, says someone else. Obviously, you guys are in charge, so you can do whatever you want, but this guy says, it's not a violation of the rules. It's just confirming she did not ask for names. Nathan says, all right, so let me say that there was a team and there was more than one. Okay, Nathan, great. So there was more than one. Did you supervise a team of more than 5 individuals? Yes. Was it more than 10? No. Okay, so it was between 5 and 10. Is that correct, Nathan? That's correct. And were those individuals all barred attorneys? No. Okay. And can you give us a sense of were the individuals paralegals, secretaries, assistants? What did they look like for the individuals who were not barred attorneys? All of the above. Okay. And how many individuals would you say were barred attorneys? More than 5? I believe yes. Okay. So now we're between 5 and 10, and we've got, looks like 5 or 6 lawyers, right? Because 5 or more than 5. So let's call it 6. Now, okay. I want to ask you a little bit about the org structure in this case against President Trump. Our understanding is that you, Nathan, were hired specifically to be a special prosecutor against Trump. Is that correct? There were no other cases that you worked on, Nathan? He says, no, that's not correct. Oh, so you worked on other cases other than just the prosecution and investigation of Trump? You did? Yes, I did. Okay, how many other cases did you work on? I don't know. Well, what types of cases were they? Criminal cases. Criminal cases. What types of crimes? Oh, I don't recall. Were they all in a specific unit or division of Fani's office, like the anti-corruption unit? Were they all in that vein? No, ma'am. And so talking specifically about the investigation and prosecution of Trump, how many attorneys did you supervise? Attorney jumps in, says, wait a minute, now we're getting into their structure, and so we can't talk about this. Fani told us no. And Barnes jumps in, says no, and says, you don't know how bad this has become since Trump brought all this out, and Chairman Jim Jordan saying these people are having to move their houses. So don't use names, okay, or anything that could identify any people. Now, you said that you supervised the team that was between 5 and 10 people. Is that correct? Yes. And so with those, even though, I believe under the contract, you were limited to 60 hours per month. Is that correct to your recollection? He says, well, I don't recall. It was something, it was awful. And, I believe Fani said, you have both publicly said that you worked more hours than you actually billed for. Is that correct? Absolutely. And so when you were working for Fani's office, you also had your private law firm. And so I just want to specifically focus on Fani. So you supervised a team of 5 to 10 people. Did they reach out to you for guidance? Not specifically, but did they reach out to you? Like, what kind of guidance are they? Well, like, did they ask, hey, Nathan, can we interview this individual? That's one example. Well, that's too broad. He's not going to know that. Well, his team would. Would the individuals that you supervise, would they ever contact you? He says, no, I'm going to object to all of that. Okay. Confidential. He says, how? It's not about the actual investigation. It's about the structure of the office. How does that impact impact the investigation at all. He says, well, Governor Barnes already brought this up. You're trying to narrow this down to 5 to 10 people. And so now this could put somebody in jeopardy if people can figure out who these attorneys are. Like we didn't see them come out and work on the screen. And how would whether conversations occurred be covered under privilege? Well, you're starting to get into like what they talked about. There's certain specific knowledge. And so it's not a perfect science, they say. I was trying to give you some leeway, but now we're going to start objecting. And the lawyers are hashing it out. Do you see this here? So you're objecting to the question that, is this statement accurate? They're objecting. Yes, ma'am, I am. It doesn't matter if you ask him, it's the same thing. I can ask whether this happened, she says. That doesn't get into specific types of evidence, Mr. Barnes. Yes, it does. How is that? Well, because it's like saying, did you review the statement? No. They're fighting it out back and forth. And then we get back into a question. Okay, Nathan, go ahead. So Barnes kind of relents. Go ahead. So just to redirect everyone, we're on the first full paragraph of page 2. It says, committee staff quietly met with lawyers and agents working for Fulton. Do you know if a meeting occurred mid-April of 2022? Nathan says, again, the dates. I can't attest to the dates. Did you ever attend a meeting with committee staff, Nathan? Well, you're referring to, so the problem we're having is this word staff and members. And my answer is no. Okay, so did you meet with members of the J6 committee then? No. Do you recall anyone from Fani's office meeting with anyone from the J6 committee? Thinking about the members. If you look down at the next full paragraph with the sentence starting, over the next few months, is everyone there? Over the next few months, committee staff also had a series of phone calls with Willis's team. They answered the prosecutor's questions and shared insight. And so do you remember having any phone calls with committee staff? Again, staff. Or contractors? Like, is he thinking these are W-9 employees? Are they contractors? Do you remember any phone calls occurring? Okay. Any phone calls with committee staff? No, they don't work for them. No, they're all contractors or something. So when you say you remember phone calls occurring, what are you referring to? Okay, I'm referring to phone calls that have occurred as it relates to J6. And your question is specifically dealing with staff and members. And my answer is no. And so when you say inquiry, what do you mean? An inquiry is a question. So, okay, so the questioner is now, I think, a little confused maybe. So when you say the J6 inquiry, what are you referring to? You said you had phone calls about the J6 inquiry. Yeah, your question about J6 is an inquiry to me, says Nathan. Okay, you're inquiring. So you're saying no. Did you not have any conversations with the J6 committee, whether it be committee staff, whether it be committee members, or anyone associated with the committee? Is that accurate? Nathan Wade is such a piece of something. He says, oh, that's a different question. She goes, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Did you have any meetings with the J6 staff? Nathan, no. Did you have any meetings with the J6 members? No. Did you have any meetings with anyone associated with the J6 committee? There it is. He goes, I believe I did. You got me. Now, finally. Dude's a liar, in my opinion. Now, when I say individuals associated with the J6 committee, how are they associated to your knowledge? Well, that means that they were not staff or members. Okay, so they were working on the J6 investigation? Yes. In what capacity? He says, ready? Okay, he's playing a game. See this? Ready? Like you didn't get it. You asked about staff or members. Yes, I am. Who else are you talking about? He says, lawyers. Lawyers aren't on staff? Lawyers. Wow. She goes, lawyers. Wow, you're so smart. You got us. Great job. So you made us dig around for that? So who were they lawyers for? So you met with the lawyers on the J6 team. I'm not sure. Were they, in what context were you speaking to the lawyers that they were involved in the J6 committee? Well, in the investigation. So the lawyers were involved in the J6 committee's investigation. Yes. So Nathan Wade admits he met with J6 lawyers. Great. Did they represent, so they were lawyers for the committee? Well, I'm not saying that. Okay. I don't know who they were lawyers for. I don't know. He was just working with some random lawyers because they were obviously lawyers that worked on the committee staff, like the staff as a whole. No, you did not speak with any lawyers that worked on committee staff. Okay. So these were like third-party lawyers, even shadier. I'd rather them actually talk to the staff lawyers. Were they lawyers for individuals who testified before the J6 committee? Well, now we're getting closer to the problem here. Lawyer objects. Okay, well, the question was, did the lawyers that were associated with the J6 committee that you met with, did those individuals represent witnesses before the J6 committee? Incredible. He says, I don't know. Okay, so just a point of clarification, blank and I are lawyers, okay? I'm the general counsel to the committee. She's the chief counsel for oversight. We are lawyers for the committee. Okay, so she's having to educate him on how this works. She's like, well, they're lawyers. They're not staff. She's like, we're lawyers and we're staff, Nathan. And so I'm not sure in the context whether they're staff or consultants. Maybe there's a third category, but I don't think we're following you as to what you're saying, like people associated with. I mean, it's like a nebulous category, so I'm not sure what you're talking about. Well, he's an outsider. He doesn't know if they're consultants or anything. Now, I assume you're all on staff permanently. She says, yeah, we are. But committees also hire lawyers from outside. Well, not very often here. And Barnes says, well, I don't know. We'll see his lawyer. Well, that's how ignorant I am. See, I don't know the ways of Washington. Right. Okay. So, but I think that we're having a little bit of a disconnect here. Somebody associated with the committee, we're trying to understand what the hell that means. He said lawyers associated. He doesn't know who they represent. Well, so why was he working with lawyers then? Now, whether they're representing the witness or whether they're representing the committee, who knows? Okay. So Nathan, we're back. Now, I want to make the record clear. You don't know who the lawyers were that you met with that were associated with the J6 committee and who they represented. Is that correct? That's correct. Which in and of itself is shocking. Why were you meeting with them? Did you give them information? Were they intelligence agents from Russia or something? You don't even know who they were? You didn't vet these people? Yeah, let's talk about January 6th. No idea who they are. Great. Amazing job. Okay, let's go back to invoice number 8. This is the one we spoke about to Athens, that line. Okay, so the very last item, it says team meeting, conf with J6, witness prep and other things. You see where I'm looking? Yeah. And just to go over the questions again, we have previously discussed how the semicolons denote different things that occurred. Is that what's happening here, Nathan? Yes, ma'am. So the team meeting was separate from the conf with J6. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And if you bill for a conf with J6, it's safe to assume that you attended the conference with J6. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. Great. So now so this billing date is May 31st, 2022. And with the Political article that we were just reading, it talked about how the initial meeting occurred in April 2022. Then there were several phone calls following that in the months following April. So I was just wondering if you remember this conference with January 6th. I don't. Do you remember who attended the conference? No, ma'am. Do you remember whether anyone associated with the J6 committee attended this conference? Well, by virtue of the entry, it says with Jan 6. So that would mean someone associated with this would have attended. Okay. So now if we look at invoice number 14, which you already have, okay, right above that line that we already worked with, the interview with DC White House, it says J6 meeting, 8 hours. You see this? I do. Do you remember this J6 meeting? I don't. Do you remember by virtue of the entry if it involved individuals associated with the J6 committee? No, ma'am, I don't. It's safe to assume since you billed for this, you were there, right? Well, so this sort of entry is confusing without the investigative notes because this entry could be in reference to a meeting that had already occurred. In other words, it could mean that there was a meeting and attorney conference involving that with whomever. That doesn't necessarily mean that on November 16th, there was a J6 meeting. Okay, so you're saying this could have just involved something related to J6, not individuals associated with J6. Is that your testimony? Yes, ma'am. Okay, let's do one more invoice then. Invoice number 19. You see this one? It starts with Zoom conf. You see what I'm reading? Yes, ma'am. It says Zoom conf with investigators in other jurisdictions. 8 hours, $2,000. We looking at the same entry? Yes, ma'am. I just kind of want to enter this to jog your memory. Do you remember ever conferring with any other jurisdictions that were actively investigating or prosecuting Trump? No, ma'am. Did you ever have any communications with anyone from Alvin Bragg's office? No, ma'am. Did you ever have any communications with Alvin Bragg? No, ma'am. And she should be saying anyone associated with Alvin Bragg, right? Because we know he's very sneaky. Have you ever had any communications with Cy Vance, former New York DA? Ever talked to Kerry Dunn, Mark Pomerantz, two prosecutors who were also there before they threw a hissy fit? Remember those two guys? Alvin Bragg won. He's like, we're not prosecuting Trump. They both threw a temper tantrum like tiny babies and then resigned. Now, did you have an understanding that they had tried to use RICO in New York to get Trump? Are you asking me if I know that? Yeah, I'm asking you. Were you aware of that? He says, well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to decipher whether I learned that in my capacity as a special prosecutor, or did I learn that in a later process? I do know that today, yes, but I don't know if I knew that back at the time. Okay, and if you remember, when you wrote Zoom conf with other investigators, do you remember what jurisdictions you were referring to? Nathan, I have no clue. Would they have all been involved in Fani's prosecution of Trump? I don't recall. But I can tell you that no other jurisdiction was involved in my decision making. Do you recall anything about that Zoom conference? I don't, says Nathan, and I'm trying really hard to, but I don't. Do you recall if it took place one entire business day? Was it 8 hours in one business day? Was it split between 2 days? I don't recall. Would you recall if you had spent 8 hours on a Zoom conference in one sitting? Well, what I do know is that there would have been, in all likelihood, says Nathan, there would have been an entry that would have broken up the dates. But since there's no semicolon, it's one entry. It would tell me in all likelihood it was an all-day conference. And you don't remember anything about this all-day conference? Like, wow, I don't. You don't remember who attended? No, ma'am. Since you billed for it, you obviously attended the 8-hour conference. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Nathan says, you know what? Yeah, this entry, he says, eureka, light bulb goes off. 1, 2, 3. If you go up 2 entries above it, you can see where I would have broken the dates up. But this entry could have very well expanded over some time, but I don't want to speculate for you. I don't remember. So you're saying it could have been a cumulative 8 hours broken up between several Zooms. Is that what you're speculating, if you will? Yes. Okay. So I want to move back to, I believe it's exhibit number 7, the judge's order, McAfee's order. That looks like the grand jury. Sorry. Okay. So prior to the motion that this order was on, I believe it was filed in January of this year, which made the relationship between you and Fani public. Were you ever concerned about if that relationship became public, about the optics of that relationship? I'm not sure I understand the question, says Nathan. Were you ever concerned that if your relationship with Fani became public, that it would cause an issue in this case, cause motions to be filed, or for a motion to dismiss to ever come up? Did that ever concern you? Well, so now I'm getting confused because I didn't think I was coming here to answer questions about my personal life. Well, I'm asking questions. I'm going to ask you questions about the order and some of this and other conflicts that arose. There was a hearing. There was a public testimony about it. That goes to our oversight that we've already discussed at length. Someone says, you better hit your phone. I think this is exceeding the scope of the subpoena, says the defense attorney. We don't need to get into folks' dicta habits here. Well, we're not doing that. We're not getting into it. We're not looking into sexual investigations. We're not going into that here. She wasn't implying that. Mr. Barnes says, well, now don't tell me that. Personal relationships, and they're getting back into this, saying also that case is also up on appeal anyways. So Nathan gets here. Well, I'm going to push that button here. Okay, so you said that the point of your question was to determine whether it was politically motivated. And so let me go back to the statement. This person says, yeah, she's trying to determine whether this was politically motivated or not. He says, well, I'll read my statement. I'll read it. He says, no, she just asked the question. You can answer it. Like, I don't know. There's anything more to it than that. He says, I'll read it back to you. So Nathan goes back to his opening statement. He says, let's see. This was not politically motivated. And she says, okay, fine. We can go to the order. This is exhibit number 7. On the last page of the order, the sentence starts with however. Judge McAfee says, however, the established record now highlights a significant appearance of impropriety that infects the current structure of the prosecution team. An appearance that must be removed through the state's selection of one of 2 options. The defendant's motions are therefore granted in part. Nathan, were you ever concerned that there was a significant appearance of impropriety regarding your relationship with Fani Willis? He says, I don't understand what this personal relationship has to do with my relationship. He says, okay, just say you're not answering that question and we can move on. That's fine. Can you describe what led to your resignation, Nathan, the judge's order? Was there ever a possibility that Fani would resign, or was it always your decision that you would resign? He says, okay. He said, hang on one second, hang on. I don't think you can answer that or speak for what Fani believed in any way. Well, I want it to make sense, says Nathan. The case belonged to Fani, who was acting on behalf of the citizens of Georgia. Fani and her office, they are Fulton County. And so I was appointed at her designation. And so Nathan says, let's just talk this through. If Willis resigns, what authority do I have to continue the prosecution? The answer is none, because I was appointed by her. So in effect, this order, in all of its ridiculousness, said one thing, and that was I needed to resign. Does that make sense, or should we walk through it another way, says Nathan. Wow. When was your last day at the office, Nathan? Order came out in March. So March 15th was your last day? That's the day I resigned, the day this order came out. And so Willis accepted your resignation on that date. Is that correct? She did. And the resignation was effective immediately. It was. And since you resigned from Fulton, how many interviews have you given the news outlet since you left? I don't know. Is it more than 5? Less than 5? Oh, less than 5. And in the judge's order on page 19 in the first paragraph, it starts with this concludes Fani's unorthodox decision. I'll read the sentence. It says, this includes Fani's unorthodox decision to make on-the-record comments and authorize members of her staff to do the same to authors intent on publishing a book during the pendency of this case. Nathan, question for you. Were you ever authorized to provide on-the-record comments to authors publishing a book? Never. Do you know who was authorized to provide comments? I do not. In our first hour, Nathan, about how in January you sat on a special committee like a search committee, how often were you in communication with Fani about search committees and what you were doing? Daily. Daily? What forms of communication would you talk to Fani in? In person, on the phone, yeah. And earlier in the first hour, you said that the communication regarding the search committee occurred after she won and before she took office and when she took office. Is that true? That's correct. And so during that time period, January until you were hired in November, how often were you in communication with Fani? Well, she had formed a transition team to assist her in transitioning, and I was part of that team. Is that different than the search committee? Yes, that is different. Okay. So our role was to facilitate a smooth smooth transition from the old regime into the new. So once elected, I think your question was from the time that she was elected? Correct. Yeah. January. Yeah, the transition team was very active, says Nathan. I don't know how many times we communicated. And question, and when did the initial outreach occur for you to serve the transition team? Again, between the time of her winning the election and the time she took office. Did your transition duties continue into 2021 after she took office? There may have been a few duties that went into her, oh, Nathan, the beginning of her regime, but not much of anything. At that point, the transition was done. It was complete. Mr. Wade, I want to ask some follow-up questions on some of these invoices. So if you could do me a favor and take a look. Do you know what DC is an abbreviation for here? Do you remember? District of Columbia. So you had an interview with DC. District of Columbia, so it's not like Diane Cobblepot. But you don't recall who that interview was with? No. So if you don't remember who the meeting was with, can you be sure that DC means District of Columbia as opposed to the initials DC? I'm fairly comfortable saying that I would have meant District of Columbia, but it could have been DC. And then it says DC White House. It does not specify if the White House in question was someone from the Trump White House or someone from the Biden White House, right? Yeah, that's correct. It doesn't specify whether it was with the White House or about the White House. Is that correct? And you don't recall either way, right? Okay, so I want to step back. At least one of the defendants in Fulton County case was employed by the White House at the time. Maybe it was Mark Meadows. So Mark Meadows was employed at the time of the indictment, at the time of the events for which he was indicted. Oh, yes, ma'am. Now, as an attorney, maybe you were talking about Mark Meadows. And is it fair to say that you might want to interview somebody who is in this position? You might want to speak with somebody at the White House counsel to talk about executive privilege. And he says, yeah, and some other regulations would be here. And so this is the Democrats trying to fix this, right? And so when you are seeking to interview somebody, you have to be concerned about executive privilege. Is that true? That's true. That's correct, ma'am. And it's a step you recall following, right? You follow privileges, don't you? I do. That's nice. Now, here's another exhibit that's been marked. This is the Free Beacon. It's a news organization. Barnes says never heard of it. Okay. Now, I just wanted to enter this in to guide our discussion, saying, okay, Nathan, the committee has received information that Willis has misused federal grant funds. Just curious if you have any knowledge as to how grant funds are used in Fulton County. I don't. As your role, did you handle anything with funds? No. Did anything come across your desk related to federal funds? No. There's another article here. It says a bombshell discovery came after you got 488 grand in federal funds. Did you ever know anything about federal funds? He says, did I have any involvement with what? Did you have any knowledge of federal grant funds that came from Congress to stop gang prevention? No, ma'am. Did you have any involvement in youth gang prevention? No. It also says that during a review of an award, we found that Fulton County got money. Did you know about them getting money? No, ma'am. Did you have any conversations with Fani about this article? No, ma'am. Did you ever talk to Fani about using federal funds? No, it's Fulton County money. Did you have any conversations with Fulton County District? It's their money. No, I didn't. Did you talk about campaign funds? There was a concern that Fani's testimony said that she kept campaign funds. Do you have any knowledge of any campaign funds being used to pay for things other than campaigns? No. Did you have any knowledge of Fani keeping campaign funds with her cash that she keeps where she lays her head? The defense attorney goes, where's that quote coming from? Where she lays her head. That comes from Fani's mouth. That comes from her testimony. What? In the hearing? Yeah, in her hearing, yeah. He says, I remember the part about the cash. I don't remember the campaign funds. He says, yeah, it came right from her testimony. Oh, it's in the article. She said cash is fungible. I've had cash for many years in my house. So for me to tell you the source of where it all comes from, Fani said, when you go to Publix, you buy something for $50, you throw it in there. Been that way my whole life. So I kept some of that cash. What's your problem? Just deal with it. So there have been allegations that money was earmarked for her campaign. And so now I'm just asking whether you had any knowledge of the use of campaign funds. No, ma'am. I didn't know Fani. Lawyer cuts him off. What article was that? That's a Fox News article. I can enter that. Yeah, put it in there. The title is Fani Willis and Nathan Wade referred to Georgia State Bar for misconduct. But of course, absolutely nothing will happen there. Oh, this is great. So they put an article in front of Nathan Wade. Nathan Wade says, and for the record, it has a very handsome picture of a gentleman on the front of it. Yeah, I believe that's Mr. Bradley? No. What is going on here? They show him a Fox News article. Fani Willis, Nathan Wade refer to the Georgia bar. Says that they're doing an amazing job. Nathan says, oh, and for the record, it has a very handsome picture of a gentleman on the front of it. That would be Mr. Wade. She says, that's you. What? He looks back at the picture. He says, oh, that's not me. Yeah, that's Mr. Bradley. Nathan Wade says, oh, well, that's not a handsome picture. That's not a handsome picture at all. Scratch that from the record. Sorry, buddy boy. It's already on the record. Nathan Wade has the hots for Terrence Bradley or something. Can't scratch it, my man. It's already on the record. Nathan Wade thinks Terrence Bradley is very handsome. and he probably wants to have a nice dinner with him. Isn't that fun? Nathan Wade, scratch that. Sorry, dude. So we're just noting that for completeness of record, and it's the second page that has the handsome gentleman on the front. Okay, Nathan Wade's freaked out. He's like, oh gosh. Switching topics, we're just going to cover as many topics as possible, they say. The committee's also been made aware of a possible motor vehicle accident that Fani was involved in after she took office in 2021. That was a one-car accident involving her county vehicle. Whoa, that's interesting. Fani got in a car accident. Just wondering if you have any knowledge of an accident in 2021. No, ma'am. Do you have any knowledge of any accident occurring that was a one-car accident involving Fani's vehicle? Yes. What can you tell us about that car accident? Well, there was an accident that occurred maybe 2 or 3 months ago, a hit and run, but that's all I know. Was Fani liquored up with that Grey Goose, baby? So 2 or 3 months this year, 2024? Yeah, 2024. Hit and run, huh? Uh-huh. And it involved Fani's county vehicle. Was she driving? To my knowledge, she was, yes. And was it just her car? Obviously the other car that hit and run, but did she hit a car? Did the other car hit her? Do you know the logistics of the accident? Nathan says, I wasn't present, but I understand that some other vehicle swiped hers and kept going. Yeah. And did you respond to the scene of the accident, if you will? Were you involved? Nathan, did I respond to the scene of the accident? Correct. No. No. How did you become aware? Well, the scene of the accident was on an expressway. Uh-huh. When I found out about it, I went to a gas station where the police and the investigators had, I don't know, what do you call it? Rendezvous, maybe? I don't know. So I went to that location. Okay, so what was your role there at the gas station? My role was to make certain that she was okay. Uh-huh. Were you there? So what occurred after the accident? Was there a report that was filed to your knowledge? Oh, I'm not certain. There was police there. I don't know. So did your role end after you confirmed that Fani was thankfully okay? Yes. And that's that. I think we're good to go off the record, and the depo is now over. Thanks for subscribing wherever it is you're watching this, my friends. We're going to keep our eye on this case, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here on the next one.